You're watching Beyond Market. Welcome. I'm Esther Awuni. Many thanks for joining us. On today's show, we'll discuss the state of Nigeria's maritime sector. As always, you can join today's conversation with the hashtag Beyond Market. You can send your thoughts, your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther Awuni. Now, what is the state of Nigeria's maritime sector and how can the country increase the share of indigenous players in the sector? My guest, Mfon Ekong Usoro, Secretary General of the Memorandum of Understanding on Port State Control for West and Central Africa, joins me to answer some of these questions. Thank you, Mfon. It's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
The Nigeria's maritime sector, it's a big sector. It's, what we hear is that it's capital intensive. For when it comes to investments, it's long-term investments, etc. But I'd like us to just start. We're looking at the sector, the African maritime sector, but of course we put particular focus on Nigeria. So let's start with Nigeria. How would you describe this current state of the maritime sector in Nigeria?
We can look at it from different perspectives. One, of course, is the actual participation, involvement of Nigerian citizens in the maritime trade, and the other one could also be from the point of fact of the markets, access to Nigerian markets, and the quantum of cargo that come into Nigeria. If we want to talk about the inflow of imports in Nigeria, we know that it is a largely import-dependent economy. So while we are just getting out of recession, what we see in the data that we see is that there's a lot more shipping activities going on at the moment than it was in about 2 years ago when there was a downturn in the economy. But on the aspect of participation, that's a different ballgame that probably we would have to dig deeper.
So, but when what we hear is, there's still opportunity for investment. Africa's maritime industry is still largely, relatively, use the word relatively, underdeveloped. Looking at the African or the Nigerian maritime sector versus, what we have in more developed climes, what would you say are some of those challenges that continue to stand in the way of progress?
The maritime industry, not just in Nigeria, I'm not going to particularize my comments to Nigeria, given where I'm coming from, has a lot of potentials. We have Africa, you could say Africa is an island. That means we're surrounded by seas. That on its own portends a great potential for the economy of Africa because the ocean provides a wide range of resources where a nation can tap from to develop its economy. So potentially all the nations that are both the Atlantic or the Pacific, the Indian Ocean or the Mediterranean, we have that potential. Now, are we tapping it as we should? Is the issue that we want to discuss today. And again, what determines the extent of activity in the maritime sector? It's also the market size, the infrastructure itself, and the strategic direction of the country. What I mean by that is that the maritime sector is varied. You could have those who invest in ownership of ships, shipping companies. You could have those who invest in logistics, only being facilitation of the cargo from the point of origin to the door of the consignee or the destination, or you, the consumer. So a whole lot goes on there in the logistics chain. Then there's also the port infrastructure, which is about ports, about terminal operations, etc. And even the linkages from port to the hinterland states. It's also an avenue that is all linked to the maritime trade. Nigerians have invested in various areas of all of what I'm talking about, but mostly on when we're talking about infrastructure, it's very much government dependent at the moment. The ports.
Is that in itself a problem?
Yes, it is a challenge. It is a challenge, and it is a challenge that Nigeria had taken on. Was it in 2005 or thereabout, when terminal operations were privatized to private port operators, so that they can introduce more efficiency into a port operation. So that challenge is being worked on. And we also see the same development in other West African countries like Ghana, like Togo, where you have private port operators making investments and operating the ports to introduce not just capacity, but efficiency.
You know, for me, yes, it's good that, focusing on local participation, local ownership, but, broader issues, as you mentioned, just looking at the entire value chain itself, from the port facilities, port infrastructure, down to the shipping lines themselves. Let's take them one after the other. Let's focus on port infrastructure. We've talked, maritime, we talk about supporting infrastructure, roads, rail, making sure that these infrastructure are in place so that the players themselves, making sure that that makes the value chain a lot more seamless. But how would you, from Nigeria down to Central Africa, what is the story in terms of how much we're investing in ports infrastructure?
For the countries that have privatized their ports and allowed private sector investment, a huge amount of capital is being invested by the private sector operators. Some of them are foreign investors, some are local investors, which is a good thing, because they did not restrict it to just local investors. Like in Nigeria, for instance, we have local port operators, we also have foreign port operators. It's huge investment in modernizing the ports that that were concessioned to them, because those were very old infrastructure. They have invested. I don't have the data, but we from what we read in the newspapers and when we have interaction with them, tremendous investment has been done in the port infrastructure.
Okay.
The other area that we really may have to speak about that hasn't seen much improvement is that of owning vessels and operating vessels by the indigenous investors in this our region.
So obviously, for them, what do they need? How do we unlock investment? How do they cross that bridge? Excuse me. How do they begin that journey of owning vessels? What are the funding options available to them? What options are they looking at?
Owning a vessel does not just depend on the individual company. It's a whole gamut of activities that will support investment in shipping companies. Okay. For instance, I may be interested in running a shipping company, owning a ship. But to do that, I need to understand the business. I need to understand what it means, and that it is different from purchasing a car, putting a car on the road to take, for haulage. That this is a different terrain, and the surrounding business environments must be favorable so that I will have the expected returns on my investment. What do I mean by that? What you need to do, or anybody who is interested in shipping, running a shipping company, would need to see whether, first of all, understand the traffic in the market. Choose where your market is going to be. Are you going to go on international seaborne trade, or is it going to be coastal trade, or is it going to be just within Nigeria or in the region? You choose that depending on the size of your pocket. Okay. Then you look at the financial institutions in the countries, which one supports the industry of shipping. Because one has to look at the environment and see that the environment you want to invest in supports your business. Shipping worldwide is so critical and so important that the nations who have emerged as great shipping nations are those that the whole of government put in the effort to support the success of their shipping company. There has to be adequate or proper access to funding. And those great maritime nations are able to provide funding in single digits for those who want to purchase and run shipping companies. They also provide several other fiscal incentives that will support that business. In any country that wants to emerge in Africa to be a ship-owning company, must have some of these things so that investors will be interested in flagging their ships in that country and also in operating on the routes. It's a combination of stuff. I just want to give you one example.
Okay.
The ship itself, it's very, very expensive if you're going to purchase a ship for carriage of goods. Now, how does a country treat the importation of vessels? How do they encourage businessmen to purchase vessels and register the vessels in the country? Example from the shipping nations, great shipping nations in Europe, is that, and Asia,
okay,
is that there is zero importation tax when you bring a ship into the country, wherever you buy the ship from or wherever the ship is being built. Zero importation tax. South Africa has also gone that route. So me wanting to invest in shipping operations in Nigeria, I have to see how will it benefit me. I'm coming into Nigeria, will I have to pay tax just to be able to bring in that vessel into Nigeria? Will I have to pay tax to bring that vessel into Ghana or to bring that vessel into Togo? You look at the environment that is favorable. In Nigeria, I would speak to that.
I'm sorry, is it a one-off tax or every time that ship? Or
No,
when it's being purchased and it's being imported into Nigeria,
okay. We pay a huge amount of tax on a ship, and that is something that is very, very discouraging to investment.
Is that part of talks? Because I know that there's constant stakeholder engagement with NIMASA, etc., with the government. Is that something that's been tabled?
It is one of the top issues that have been tabled by NIMASA and also Nigerian Shippers Council.
And
the investors complain about that a lot.
Are we making a headway? What's the body language of the government? Is this something the government has said or has, given a clue that it might consider reducing?
I understand that the government is interested in ease of doing business in all the industries in Nigeria. Representations have been made by the Shippers Council, by Ship Owners Association of Nigeria, and by NIMASA to the Minister of Transport, who has also taken it up to pursue these things because they are very, very vital.
Okay.
And so Nigerians have put that in the front. If that is done, more will be able to come in, buy ships, register, and grow the registry, because the reputation of the country is very much linked to the tonnage that flies that country's flag.
Right.
And it's a thing, just to round up on that, for the airline industries, you import an airline into Nigeria is zero importation duty.
That's the aircraft itself?
Yes.
Okay, Mfon, let's just pause here. We'll take a short break and come back and pick up from where we left off. I've been speaking to Mfon Ekong Usoro. She's the Secretary General of the Memorandum of Understanding on Port State Control for West and Central Africa. We'll be looking at the maritime industry in Africa. If you're just joining us, Mfon Ekong Usoro, Secretary General of the Memorandum of Understanding on Port State Control for West and Central Africa, is with me, and we're discussing the state of Nigeria's maritime sector. We're also looking at the state of maritime sector in the continent as a whole. Mfon, thank you for your time so far.
Thank you. Thank you for having me again.
Now, it would appear that things are, when it comes to trade for the African continent, things are about to change. And by that I mean I'm referring to the African Continental Free Trade Area. Now, of course, there are questions have been asked as to how or what will be the place of maritime sector growth within the AFCFTA? How will things change? Obviously, everyone wants to see more trade between want to see bigger inter-African trade on the continent. So how is this going to change things for the maritime sector?
It's a giant stride. All of us are very excited about it. There's been regional trading community, but having it at a continental level, it's very, very much welcome. I think the time is ripe for that. Right now, I think what they have done and negotiated is for goods, trade negotiation on goods. They have not yet negotiated on services. I think that is going to start because maritime transportation falls under services.
Okay.
It portends a good investment opportunity for Africans and also foreigners who want to invest in Africa. First of all, when we are talking about integration, which is the aim of African Union Commission and the ultimate aim of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, okay. Transportation linkages is one of the greatest and most important weapon for integration and for intra-African trade. With specific respect to the maritime sector, even if we are talking about trade in goods, it is intended that those goods should be manufactured in Africa, right? For the goods to be manufactured in Africa, depending on the type of goods we're talking about. If it is agricultural goods, Africa is blessed with good land, but to make it into industrial farming, we need to import the machineries. We need to import some chemicals. And if we're talking about other kind of goods, like electronics, etc., some, if not most of the components will have to be imported to the factories in Africa to be able to import it and fit the intra and inter-African trade. So it still rests back on shipping. When we emphasize manufacturing, we emphasize agriculture, we emphasize other sectors, we forget that a critical component of that being a profitable business venture depends on the transportation linkage, which is maritime, it is shipping. Mm-hmm. Because all of those equipment are heavy, you don't freight them. They come by ship. If the cost of their coming to the factory is not competitive, that means the goods that we produce in that country will not also be competitive in the intra and inter-African trade. So while the
AFCFTA, I know,
exactly,
it's
I mean, it's tongue twisting, opens up the market. Those that will take advantage of the market are those that provide the infrastructure at a commercial rate that adds value, okay, and that makes economic and commercial sense for investment. Those are the countries that will make the most of the massive trade opportunity that is being unlocked.
Okay, so I guess that begs the question. Agreement. I mean, since we're here in Nigeria, how is Nigeria preparing? What steps, specific steps are we taking? I know that we are also working on a number of, obviously, maritime sector here still has challenges. We're still trying to solve some of those challenges, but the AFCFTA is happening at the same time, and obviously there has to be either a tweak in the strategy or perhaps a change of strategy to at least accommodate this new model, this new free trade area. So what are we doing in that respect?
Well, I think I would like to leave that to the government people, those that are in the policy-making agencies, but the industry, if you follow the trend, at some point were skeptical about Nigeria signing up to the free trade agreement. The reason they were skeptical is not fear of opening up the market, but our state of preparedness in terms of being able to produce goods in Nigeria at a competitive rate. So this point has been made clear to the government that for Ghana, for Congo, for South Africa to buy goods goods manufactured in Nigeria, it has to be at a competitive price. It has to be top quality. With these challenges and these indices that have been discussed and put in front of government, they know what they should do. I want to believe that that is part of what is being tackled by the Ease of Doing Business initiative in the presidency.
Okay, I want us to quickly, just to deviate a bit, quickly talk. I mean, you're the Secretary General of the Memorandum of Understanding on Port State Control for West and Central Africa. Just quickly, briefly tell us what that entails.
It's an intergovernmental organization of 22 member states, okay, countries that abut the Atlantic from Mauritania to South Africa, 22 member states. Our job is principally to ensure and enforce compliance with international maritime conventions and codes with respect to safety of navigation, okay, technical integrity and safety of the vessel, and also the welfare of the captain and the crew on the vessel. So that is what we do. We train inspectors, which we call post-state control inspectors, in each of the countries, and let them know the new guidelines, the new rules, train them on how to inspect the vessels. The point about inspecting these vessels is to ensure compliance, like I said, but it is so critical in the sense that a vessel may be registered in Ghana, but does not trade in Ghanaian waters. It trades in the waters of some other parts of the world. Now, that ship, save for post-state control, which enables the officers of any country that ship goes to board that ship would probably be trading not inspected. Nobody knows about the safety management of the ship and how the crew and the masters are being treated on board vessels, and that will portend danger for us, for all of us, when there are marine incidents involving those type of substandard ships. So when because the IMO set up about nine post-state control regimes plus U.S. Coast Guard making it 10. Wherever the ship goes to, whichever port it goes to in the world, irrespective of its port of registry, that ship will be inspected to make sure that it is not substandard. And that reduces the incidence of marine accidents or pollution of the waters. That
so
is
basically,
what we do,
protecting the environment. So I would like us to just, go from there to maritime security quickly. I know that is also a big topic, and I believe Nigeria is hosting an event later this year, on that topic itself. I mean, help us understand how big a problem is it? And we know that piracy continues, and it's a global problem, it's not just an African problem. But how bad do we have it here on the African continent?
It is not desirable. We are not there yet where we would want to be to make us comfortable. At some point, the attention was in Somalia, and then the world turned its attention, focused on solving the issue of piracy in Somalia. Now, we still have piracy in the west coast and also eastern coast of Africa. It is not a single country problem. Unlike security on land, where you have land borders and you have security from one state to the other, the sea has no boundary. So whatever happens in the sea affects each of us. And most of these crimes, this armed robbery, piracy, happens not in the coastal waters, but in the EEZ, or even exclusive economic zone, or even further. And so it is important that all of us put our hands together to fight piracy.
I was just going to ask that question. How would you describe the level of cooperation at this point?
There is serious cooperation. There is the global one, and we also have the Gulf of Guinea Commission. We have partners from Europe and from the US who are partnering to provide assets and manpower on how to tackle the problem. Nigeria has invested a lot in acquiring assets, Nigerian Navy together with NIMASA. And indeed, that Global Conference on Maritime Security is next month, October. It's going to bring all the interested parties to sit down and discuss and see how far we have gone, what needs to be done. From my point of view, really, I think the international community should go beyond the training and the assets that is being given. We should go to the extent of what the world did with respect to blood diamonds. Most of these pirates, they come in because of the hydrocarbon, the crude oil. And there's a way that crude oil that is taken from these zones by pirates could be identified so that any company that purchases or a country that purchases crude oil from pirates will be given the same treatment that the world gives to countries and companies that purchase illegal diamonds and what we used to talk about in blood diamonds. Other illegal activities in the sea, like unregulated, unlawful shipping. Let us now start targeting the beneficiaries. Because if the pirates see that the oil that they bunker illegally has no market, it will be a deterrent. If they also know that unregulated, unlawful shipping along the west coast or central or eastern coast of Africa will have no buyers, it will cease to be an attractive trade. So I think that is the way we should go. Just as they are naming and shaming slave labor, companies that don't pay labor properly in Asia or in Africa, people are campaigning against the products being sold in shops. Okay. So I think we should do that.
So we're going to have to leave it there. But thank you so much for giving us a good picture into the state of the maritime sector in Nigeria and, of course, indeed, the African continent. Thank you for your time today. I've been speaking to Mfon Ekong Usoro. She's the Secretary General of the Memorandum of Understanding on Port State Control for West and Central Africa. We've been looking at the state of maritime sector in Nigeria and, indeed, the African continent. Well, that's our show for today. Thank you so much for being a part of it. Remember, you can watch the show at 5 p.m. West African time daily and have access to all previous episodes of Beyond Market on our website, that's cnbcafrica.com. You can also stay engaged with the hashtag Beyond Market, and you can send your thoughts, your comments to my Twitter handle too. It's at Esther O. Awuni. From myself and the team, do have a great day.